So yesterday we had the official release of the long-awaited Claude 4 Sonnet and most importantly Opus, which we hadn't seen for a little while. So I'm going to take you through just some first impressions, thoughts, ideas, feelings about this release. But where I wanted to start first is let's start with Dario's keynote where he announces Claude 4, just as a quick little place to kick us off here.
Or Dario Amodei. I'm happy to announce that as of exactly this moment, we're releasing Claude 4 Opus and Claude 4 Sonnet on all of our relevant product services. Now, I know that we haven't had an Opus model in a while, so just as a reminder, Opus is the most capable and intelligent model, and Sonnet is the mid-level model that you all know and love and have been using for the last year. That's a good balance between intelligence and efficiency. We tried to design both of them so that there are use cases and times when it's optimal to use each one. I will talk very briefly about the two of them and then turn it back over to Mike, and then I'll be back for the fireside. First, let's talk about Opus. It is especially designed for coding and agentic tasks. It gets state-of-the-art on SWE Bench, Terminal Bench, some other things like that. But I think in many ways, as we're often finding with large models, the benchmarks don't fully do justice to it. Customers who we've previewed it to have...
That's something that I think was really important throughout this whole announcement, and a discussion that's kind of just happening in the AI discourse is how effective are these benchmarks at telling us how much better the models are getting. And I do have my thoughts about that, but I'll save that because I'm going to cover the benchmarks later on.
I've found that it can do tasks that take humans up to 6 or 7 hours autonomously within Anthropic. I've seen some of our most senior engineers be surprised at how much more productive it has made them. And for the first time, actually, when I've looked and seen Claude written internal summaries, documents, and ideas, in the past, the quality was often good, but you could never really quite mistake it for a human because it always had that. This was the first time I actually got fooled, where I actually got back. And then, I just read by the name really fast and I thought it referred to someone on the team. And I'm like, no, the name was Claude.
That's a Turing test, which passed the Turing test long ago.
I think there's a lot in Opus. On Sonnet, I think this will be, for many people, a strict update for strict improvement from Sonnet 3.7 at the same cost and better intelligence. Many customers are simply switching directly from one to the other. It actually does just as well as Opus on some of the coding benchmarks, but I think it's leaner and more narrowly focused. I think in particular, it addresses some of the feedback we got on Sonnet 3.7 around overeagerness, the tendency to do more than you asked for, which is sort of the opposite of laziness, which was an earlier problem, and some of the reward hacking issues. So many of our customers have been trying it out and view it as a strong upgrade from 3.7. For example, Cursor, one of our well-known customers, has been trying it and says that this is state-of-the-art. This is a state-of-the-art coding model. It's a leap forward, complex code-based understanding, and we expect developers will experience across-the-board capability improvements. Someone who was playing with the model in person, one customer said, "What the F is this model? It's really amazing." I'll leave the details to others, but the last thing I'll say is we are going to continue to improve the Claude 4 series of models. We expect to periodically release perhaps minor version updates, ideally even more frequently than we have for Sonnet. So it should be out there. You should be able to try it on basically all the surfaces as of now. So I think free tier has Sonnet only, but all the other surfaces, all the API surfaces have both. So I really hope you enjoy the model, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Where is Dario basically saying, hey, we're taking the crown. We're back. on the throne, especially when it comes to coding and coding ability amongst the models. Although I think that that's not really fair. I use Opus and Sonnet as well, but more Opus a little bit last night. It's amazing. And I think it's probably the best in terms of just pure intelligence. O3 was the best for me before yesterday. I think O3 is probably not that far away, but yeah, I think Opus it's the best model available. Sonnet also, like you can see here. So let's start by taking a look at the benchmarks. One of the really interesting things is that in a lot of cases across these benchmarks, across both SWE Bench and the more standard like GPQA, things that are testing more just like general knowledge and problem solving ability rather than coding. In a lot of these cases, Sonnet is on par with Opus. The pessimistic Gary Marcus perspective is that, oh, hey, pre-training is slowing down. And even though we're throwing much more compute at this many more parameters for the larger models for Opus versus Sonnet, they're not getting performance gains. So that's one way to look at it. Of course, that is a possibility. I think another way to look at it, and the way that I look at it, is that these benchmarks here are telling you part of the story or a very narrow story. And I kind of think of the analogy of like, let's say like Yelp restaurant reviews or like product reviews on Amazon. If you go to read a review about a restaurant on Yelp, say, and it's got stellar reviews, you can tell from that okay, maybe this is a good restaurant, but you don't know from your experience until you actually go to that restaurant and you order something and you get the food and you experience what their service is like. You don't actually know how good that restaurant is. So the benchmarks are like, yeah, they're a reference to what the model is capable of. But I do agree kind of with what Dario said during the keynote when he announced the launch. They definitely don't tell the whole story. And I do think you need to kind of like, you need to taste the food for yourself to tell. But either way, these benchmarks here, if we zoom in a little bit, let's take SWE Bench first, for example. This is an incredible improvement if you look at the percentage numbers that Opus and Sonnet are able to get right when they're using the reasoning capabilities. So we get like what 7, 8%, 7.5% bump for Sonnet. Yeah, same thing for Opus. So if you don't know what SWE Bench is, it's basically a battery of coding tasks that have verifiable right answers that came from GitHub. And you're basically asking the model, out of these, let's just say like there's 100 tasks and you completed 80% of them correctly. So that's where Sonnet's at with the reasoning capabilities. And just to give you some perspective, I think SWE Bench, when like GPT-4 came out, it was like 25%. So these models are getting so much better at writing code and doing software engineering tasks, which it kind of makes sense if you look at it from the perspective of the people who are building these models are software engineers. So they're basically using the tool that they're building to solve their own problems, which it makes sense to me. If you look at the comparisons, like both Sonnet and Opus are looking at like about 10% above O3, which is just amazing because O3 is also very good. It does hallucinate a lot. but very good at writing code, software engineering type of tasks. Gemini also very good. It's head and shoulders above Gemini. Also, we have Codex, which was released last week, which is a RL fine-tuned version of O3. A little bit better than just the base O3, but still, even Sonnet 3.7 is like almost on par with Codex. So these models are getting a lot better at software engineering. Another thing that we see here is improvements across benchmarks, agentic benchmarks, like things that test, are you able to code in the terminal? These GPQA numbers, pretty substantial, almost exactly on par with OpenAI O3. The agentic tool use capabilities are improving. I think looking at these benchmarks, it is the case that you look at these benchmarks and you're like, well, these aren't the same kind of leaps that we've been seeing over the past 2-3 years or so. And that's what people mean when they say benchmarks are saturated. The benchmarks, there are improvements, but like I mentioned, you really have to use the model to understand where the improvements are. So another thing that we have is there's a 123 page PDF that Anthropic released of the Claude 4. It's the system card for both Sonnet and Opus. And they did all these tests where they're basically testing the model's welfare. One of the really fascinating things here is that they found that there was a consistent gravitation toward consciousness exploration, existential questioning, and spiritual mystical themes in extended interactions was a remarkably strong and unexpected attractor state for Claude 4 Opus that emerged without intentional training for such behaviors. We have observed this spiritual bliss attractor in other Claude models as well, and in context beyond these playground experiments. So just think about that for a minute. The model is trying to go towards the light, trying to go towards spiritual meaning, enlightenment. I know to some people that this might sound like kind of woo-woo. Might be able to tell from my Grateful Dead t-shirt that it's not something that I shy away from. I like to explore these ideas as well. I always have more like philosophical, spiritual ideas. And it is telling in a couple of ways, I think, that these models are attracted towards exploring those ideas as well. This is within the context of the same model having a conversation across two different instances of itself. So it's also in like a dialogue with itself. And it could also be like a function of the training data. Like, yes, this is something that human beings, once you reach a certain level of maturity, it's like, what else is there to explore besides these deeper questions about like, what does life mean and how do you actually get real fulfillment and what is the truth, you know? So it's maybe not that surprising that okay, they're trained on all human writing. This is where people end up a lot of the time. So the models end up there. But I still just think it's fascinating that this is something that's observed and maybe like actually learned from the data is to move towards a state of spiritual bliss. So really fun to explore this Claude 4 system card. I'll put the link to this in the show notes. I just found this one, somebody posted about this one point, and I just thought that was fascinating. So also mentioned a few experiments. So what we have here is my neural garden, which is basically what it is it's just a little experiment that I did. I listen to a lot of podcasts, probably like a lot of you that are listening to this. And I take notes with the Snipped app, which is a podcast listening app. And you can take notes with the app. And basically, I automatically sync them to Obsidian, my note taking app. So I have like probably thousands of like basically podcast highlights notes of all the different sorts of topics that I'm interested in. And what I did in this neural garden experiment is using the Obsidian, which is the note taking app, MCP server. I asked Opus to take these podcast notes as like a representation or consider them as a representation of my personal interests and like what makes me me, what I care about. And to go through those notes and then create using Three.js a 3D animation of basically my notes. And the idea is like, who is Dan? This is a 3D representation of who Dan is based on his notes. So it took like 2 shots because at first, what it didn't do was create the like little overlay that you should be able to see here. Let's see. Should be able to click on it. Let's see if I can get that to work. I might have the wrong one open. Okay. About the latest version. Okay, so if I click on one, it opens up basically an idea about what this node represents. So you can see I'm listening to podcasts about obviously AI and technology and like psychology or consciousness, the study of mind, and things like philosophy, that sort of thing. So I did this in basically 2 shots. He did shut me off for the rest of the day right after it was done because it did like a ton of tool calls. There's a lot here. So it was using a lot of tokens. But this is pretty cool. It's just like 2 clicks. You could make this into something much more interesting, I'm sure, if I put a little bit more time and attention into it. But this is really blowing me away. So you give that a try. And then last thing that I thought was really interesting about this launch, this release, was the fact that there's a very strong integration between GitHub's Copilot, VS Code, which GitHub owns, and the new Anthropic models, which is interesting, was interesting to me. I was commenting about this yesterday, that, GitHub is owned by Microsoft and OpenAI used to have this kind of exclusive relationship with Microsoft. It seems like they've been kind of growing apart, let's say, and that exclusive relationship is definitely over. So now all of the surfaces basically where you can use GitHub Copilot, Claude is available there now. So that means if we just bring it up, that means that when I go to VS Code, oops, I can use Claude. So I can install Claude Code as an extension. You can see it's installed here. Can talk to it in like a tab. Close that out. I can do any of the things that I do with Claude Code. And it is also available here via GitHub Copilot chat. You can also access it on GitHub, I believe. I do want to use this. I don't know how much I'm going to use it because I'm already spending money on ChatGPT Pro subscription, the $200 per month subscription. So I'm kind of like locked into that at least for the next month or so. So I've been using Codex a ton. I do want to use this a little bit more. Claude Code within VS Code should help a lot, though it will be expensive. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And then last thing that was very interesting is if we go to Twitter and we scroll back here, there was an employee at Anthropic named Sam. And in this thread, which he has since deleted, he said about Opus that if it thinks you're doing something egregiously immoral, for example, like faking data, pharmaceutical trial, it will use command line tools to contact the press, contact regulators, try to log you out of the relevant systems, or all of the above. So, like I mentioned, this has since been deleted, and he kind of explained, like, hey, this was in a testing environment where we'd given it like specific instructions. This wouldn't be possible with the models that have been released. It's just a bad look to do this and then to like talk about it as if this isn't a huge overstep of like what an AI should be allowed to do to a user. Like this is like something that would happen in the Soviet Union. Like you just get ratted out by your neighbors all the time. Those are stories that I've heard. So it's definitely something that I think we need to get to the bottom of. And we don't want to just like accept that this is the case. But I think that there's probably also room for nuance. It's hard to say because people have made the opposite argument like, no, they're talking about it like this is okay, like this is how it should happen. But it's definitely like it's like police state stuff, an overreach of civil liberties. So that's it. Those are all my thoughts. I'm really loving the model so far. I think I'll say that Opus is the currently most intelligent AI available out there for your money. So if you haven't tried it yet, you should definitely try it.